I've been here as the police chief since 2007. And before that, about 2001 or so, I became an adjunct professor here. Previously, I was the chief over in the village of Worth when I first started here as an adjunct criminal justice instructor. I think when I look at Moraine Valley, I look back over the years and there's an awful lot of history. Much of it was unintended. When I got out of high school, my general plans didn't involve anything to do with college. I was actually a working musician at the time. I remember we were working a lot of clubs in the area, and a group from student activities from Moraine Valley came to the club that we were working in, said, would you play a concert at Moraine? We do 6 of these a year. I had never been on the campus before. It was about 1973, and I said, sure, gave him our agent's name. Shortly thereafter, we got notified that we were going to be working within a month or so, and it was in the middle of winter. So my first trip to Moraine Valley, it was all the temporary buildings, the G building and the A building, and the A building had just been finished. The entire parking lot was gravel, and for parking bumpers, I still remember they had telephone poles laid laterally across the parking lot. I didn't know where we were going to play. I assumed that we were going to be in the gym, and when we walked in, they told us, you're going to be in the student activities building. Well, a lot of the local groups in the area that worked in the Midwest would play different concerts, and we expected to be in a bigger building. I think it was either the 400 or 600 building was the activities building at the time, and there must have been about 500 people jammed into this Quonset hut where it literally had to be 100 degrees in there. The heat was on, it was the middle of January, the sweat was pouring down all of our faces, and we hadn't even started working yet. While we were there, a sleet and snowstorm started. And I remember our equipment manager, who was trying to load the truck, wound up getting stuck on top of one of the telephone poles, because in those days we didn't really plow the gravel. So my first experience was the fact that we had half the student body that was at the concert that night picking up the back of the truck and pushing it off of the telephone poles. It was several years after that, I always tell this other story, my mother haunted me to take classes. And I had taken a class just to keep my mom happy, and I figured I'd take the easiest one I could. I took it at an extension center over in Bridgeview. It's the recreation center at the time, and it was a little dingy building at the time, and John Burian was teaching the class. He had this long-haired guy walk in, and sitting in the middle of a bunch of police officers taking introduction to law enforcement, and he couldn't figure out what I was doing there. It was an afternoon class, I think about 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and I'd go through the class and he would just stare at me and try to figure out what this long-haired guy was doing in his class, because during that time everybody was in the law enforcement classes were on usually federal grants for law enforcement studies. So it was police officers, and then they got this knucklehead sitting in the front row. So about 2 or 3 weeks into the class, he'd ask me, are you going to be a policeman? In front of the entire class. And I said, no, I'm not going to be a policeman. And then he said, oh. And he says, well, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I was trying to keep peace with my mother, and it seemed like the easiest course I could take. So needless to say, I endeared myself to my professor at the time. But he must have seen something in me, because someplace along that 16-week journey, he grabbed me and said, hey, listen. He goes, I know you're one of those musician types, but I've got, I think you could be a policeman, and I think you should work for me. And I said, I should. And he goes, yes, we just started the Office of Campus Safety Security. And John was very proud of the OCSS, Office of Campus Safety Security. He was the director, and he promptly put me on the midnight shift. And I found myself sitting out here in the middle of the evening going, what the heck did I just do to myself? In those days, it was all gravel lots and temporary buildings. We literally had either 1 or 2 guys working overnight. Our office was up by the old telephone room in the G building, and literally it was 2 desks and a file cabinet was the campus security office. When you think back about it, the guys I had worked with in that office, John literally not only taught us how to be police officers, because he was retired from the city of Chicago, but he probably, over a 15-year duration, supplied police officers to probably most of the surrounding communities. I look back at it and I think about the lessons we learned there all allowed probably the 15 or 20 of us who came through that office while I was affiliated with Moraine, all to go out and be successful police officers. Many supervisors, a couple of us chiefs, and none of us ever thought that our trips through the hallowed halls at Moraine Valley, sitting in a little office with 2 desks and a file cabinet, was going to lead us to be police officers. We were unarmed at the time. We had to call Palos Hills if we wanted backup. And it was interesting enough because in those days, literally when the college was closed, there was nobody here. Just west of the college was a landfill, and you could see the smoke pots burning in the middle of the night and smell the methane while you're walking through the buildings at night. And we were very proud of the work we did, but I think each of us were in a position where we were thinking that we wouldn't be here very long. During the time I was here, I had met a girl in the 1500 building in registration, and she wound up becoming my wife, so Moraine Valley handed me my future. I left and I was gone for many, many years. And it wasn't until somebody, Dean Kennedy, Sharon Kennedy, asked me if I'd like to teach a class here. That had I ever had any more affiliation for probably close to 25 or 30 years at Moraine Valley, I came back and I was an adjunct. And she was also the person who slid me the job posting and said, you know, this job is going to be open, which is police chief. I went home and mentioned to my wife that I was considering leaving the community that I was working for and coming back to Moraine. And she smiled at me. She says, do you really want to do that? And I said, yeah, I think I do. I think I'm going to end up where I probably started off my career. So when I came back to the college, it was surprising how many familiar faces I'd seen, people who'd been here for 40 years, that when I was either a long-haired student or a campus security officer, had stayed their entire careers here. The college has grown, and really I didn't recognize it, but strangely enough, when I first came back, the 100 building, which was the last temporary building that was still in existence, wound up being my office. And I go, oh my God, I came here with temporary buildings and I'm back with temporary buildings. So when I came back as police chief, they slid me into what used to be the cafeteria, and that's where my office was. So I look at the evolution of Moraine Valley not only as something that's been good for the community and good for me, because it started me on my law enforcement career and also my education career, but it also was a full evolution of my career. I've got 42 years on the job. I've been police chief in 3 different locations. It all started here, and unless something drastic changes where I fall and hit my head, it's going to end here. So those are my memories of Moraine Valley. Nothing but temporary buildings, gravel lots, and a bunch of people trying to do as well as they could with not a lot of facilities.